I've faced down surface-to-air missile batteries over the deserts of Syria, the sky lit up like the 4th of July from hell. I've landed a 33,000-pound F/18 Hornet on the pitching deck of a carrier in the middle of a Pacific typhoon, a postage stamp of hope in an ocean of fury. But nothing in my training, not one single minute of the thousands of hours logged in the cockpit or in survival school, had prepared me for the ambush laid at my own welcome home party. The Vance family estate in McLean, Virginia, wasn't a home, it was a declaration of power. Marble floors gleamed under chandeliers that dripped crystal light, and the air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and quiet ambition, felt harder to breathe than the thin atmosphere at 40,000 feet. This was the Washington, D.C. nexus, a world away from the smell of jet fuel and camaraderie I called home. My fiancé, Alex, squeezed my hand, his smile genuine and proud. He was the son of Senator Thaddeus Vance, and in this world, he moved with an easy grace I could only envy. "They love you, Viper," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. I scanned the room of smiling politicians, lobbyists, and old money power brokers. Their eyes held the polite, predatory curiosity of sharks circling a new piece of bait. They didn't love me, they were assessing an asset, a novelty. Captain Maya Vipertran, USMC, a shiny new prop for the Vance family collection. My gaze drifted to my tactical pack, resting on a brocade armchair near the French doors. It was out of place here, a gritty piece of reality amidst the curated elegance. Inside, secured in a padded sleeve, was my military-issue laptop. It was second nature to maintain awareness of my gear, a habit forged in environments where a forgotten piece of kit could mean life or death. That's when I first saw her. Eleanor, Alex's stepmother, drifted near the chair, her movements a study in practiced nonchalance. She adjusted a flower arrangement, her eyes flicking to the bag for a split second too long. My internal radar, the one honed by tracking bogies in crowded airspace, pinged softly. Threat assessment low, but noted. A little while later, as I was politely deflecting a senator's questions about drone capabilities, Eleanor materialized at my side. Her smile was a masterpiece of social engineering. "Maya, my dear, you look absolutely radiant. We are all so terribly proud of you." She held a glass of dark red wine. As she gestured expansively, her hand jerked, and the entire contents of the glass cascaded down the front of my dress whites. The stain bloomed like a gunshot wound on the pristine fabric. "Oh, my heavens! Maya, I am so dreadfully sorry!" Her voice was a symphony of feigned horror. Gasps rippled through the nearby guests. Before I could even react, her cool hand was on my arm, steering me toward the grand staircase. "Come, you must get changed immediately. There's a silk blouse in my closet that will be perfect for you." Her grip was surprisingly firm, her urgency just a little too theatrical. It was a perfect distraction. Too perfect. In the cockpit, we call this a sham trap, a sudden, bright flare designed to draw your eyes away while the real threat gets a missile lock. My pilot's instinct, that cold, clear voice in the back of my mind, screamed that I was being painted by enemy radar. When I returned downstairs 10 minutes later, a borrowed blouse feeling foreign and flimsy against my skin, the party's hum had resumed its normal rhythm. I scanned the room, my eyes searching for Eleanor. I found her across the crowded salon, talking to a congressman. As if sensing my stare, she looked up. Our eyes met, for a fraction of a second, before she could rearrange her features into a mask of polite concern. I saw it. A glint of pure, unadulterated triumph. It was the same look I'd seen in the eyes of a rival pilot after a victory in a training dogfight. It was a kill confirmation. She knew I'd seen it, and she didn't care. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of fake smiles and empty pleasantries. Then, just as the party began to thin, two men detached themselves from the shadows near the entrance. They were nondescript in their dark, well-fitting suits, the kind of men who are professionally invisible until they want to be seen. They moved through the crowd with an unnerving economy of motion, their path converging on me. My pulse didn't spike. It settled into the low, steady thrum it found just before a catapult launch. One of them spoke, his voice quiet, devoid of any emotion. "Captain Tran?" I nodded, my eyes meeting his. "Special Agent Davies, NCIS. "This is Special Agent Miller." He gestured to his partner. "We need to have a word with you, in private." The trap had snapped shut. The NCIS agents moved with a practiced, almost sterile efficiency, their polished black shoes making no sound on the plush oriental rug of Senator Hayes's study. The air hung thick with the scent of old leather, stale cigar smoke, and Aliner's cloying rose potpourri, a combination that always made my stomach clench. It was the scent of a gilded cage. As I stepped over the threshold behind them, the walls seemed to close in, not with the familiar pressure of a cockpit during a high G turn, but with the suffocating weight of memory. This room was the heart of her husband's power, but it was Aliner's territory. Every object, from the leather-bound books she'd never read to the strategically placed photos on the mahogany desk, was a testament to her meticulous curation of their public image. Standing here now, with 2 federal agents cataloging the scene of a murder, felt like sacrilege. And it brought the last few years of my undeclared war with Alina rushing back with the force of a carrier launch. It was never open hostility. She was far too intelligent, too politically astute for that. Her war was one of 1,000 tiny, calculated cuts, each one designed to remind me of my place. My eyes drifted to the mantelpiece, crowded with silver-framed photographs of a smiling, perfect dynasty. There was Alex at his Naval Academy graduation, Alex with his father on a sailboat, the whole Hayes clan at Christmas, radiating Canody-esque charm. I was conspicuously absent from every frame. I remembered that Christmas, standing just out of the shot, being politely asked to step aside for a photo that was just for the family. The first time Alex brought me home, Alina had appraised me not as her son's partner, but as a political variable. Her smile was a masterpiece of controlled warmth. "How exotic," she'd said, her eyes sweeping over me, her voice a soft, cultured purr, "and a fighter pilot. It's truly admirable what you've managed to overcome." The word overcome hung in the air like smoke. She meant my parents, the refugee camps, the fact I wasn't born into a world of summer homes and Senate hearings. To her, my success wasn't an achievement, it was an anomaly, a curious story she could tell at cocktail parties. Alex, bless his heart, heard it as a compliment. I heard the coded message, "You are not one of us." From then on, it was a steady drip of poison disguised as pleasantries. At charity dinners I was Alex's friend, Catherine. "She flies jets." The introduction always reduced me to a novelty, erasing the depth of our relationship. She'd offer backhanded compliments that felt like strafing runs. The military must be such a harsh environment for such a delicate woman, she'd once mused over tea, her expression a mask of faux concern. She was framing my strength as a fragility, my service as an unfortunate circumstance I had to endure, rather than a path I had chosen and fought for. The final battle in our Cold War happened just a week before the barbecue, before the sirens and the flashing lights. She found me alone in the sunroom, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across the wicker furniture. "Catherine," she began, her voice losing its usual airy quality, replaced by something as cold and hard as steel. "The senator's re-election is at a critical juncture. The slightest hint of a scandal, anything unconventional, could be devastating." She paused, letting the word unconventional land with the force of a blow. "This family needs to present a united, traditional front to the public. You understand, don't you?" The message was as clear as a direct order over the comms. I, Catherine Viperfam, daughter of Vietnamese refugees, a woman who felt more at home in a flight suit than a cocktail dress, was the unconventional element. I was the scandal waiting to happen. She didn't just disapprove of me, she saw me as a political liability, a threat that needed to be neutralized. "Major Pham." The sharp voice of the lead agent Davies yanked me from the past. He was standing by the senator's desk, a gloved finger pointing towards the leather blotter. "Does anything here seem out of place to you?" My gaze swept over the meticulously organized surface. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. My mind replayed Eleanor's words, asterisk, a threat that needed to be neutralized, asterisk. I had assumed she meant politically. But standing in the room where her husband had been shot, a cold dread began to seep into my bones. What if I had completely underestimated her methods? My eyes locked onto a small, metallic glint, beside the ornate pen holder, partially obscured by a stack of papers. It was a challenge coin, not a senatorial seal or a Navy crest. The insignia was one I knew instantly, one that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It belonged to a highly classified special operations unit, the kind that specialized in making problems and people quietly disappear. And I knew for a fact it didn't belong to the senator. The air in Senator Vance's study was thick enough to choke on, smelling of old leather, expensive bourbon, and the kind of betrayal you only read about in intelligence briefs. It was a room built for power plays, with dark mahogany walls that seemed to absorb sound and a fireplace that offered no warmth. I stood before the senator's imposing desk, the fabric of my borrowed silk blouse feeling foreign and flimsy, a stark contrast to the familiar, reassuring weight of my uniform. Senator Vance sat behind his desk, a statue of gravitas and concern. Eleanor stood beside him, a hand resting on his shoulder, the perfect portrait of a supportive wife. Across from me were two men who introduced themselves as special agents from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. The lead agent, Davies, had eyes as gray and unforgiving as a battleship's hull. His partner, a younger man named Chen, remained silent, his gaze fixed on me, analytical and cold. "Major," Davies began, his voice flat, devoid of any preamble. "We're here in response to an anonymous tip regarding a serious breach of national security." I kept my posture straight, my hands clasped loosely behind my back parade rest, a subconscious habit. "I understand, sir. How can I help?" The tip concerned the unauthorized dissemination of classified materials, specifically, the complete flight control system schematics for the new XQ-99 Viper drone project. A cold knot formed in my stomach. The Viper was my baby, the project I'd poured the last 2 years of my life into. Its secrets were guarded more fiercely than gold. The files were sent from an encrypted military email account, Davies continued, his eyes never leaving mine. The transmission was traced to an IP address, originating from this residence, from this network. He paused, letting the words hang in the suffocating silence. The timestamp was from approximately 20 minutes ago. "The email account belongs to you, Major Thorne." Time seemed to warp, the seconds stretching into an eternity. My own email account. From this house. It was impossible. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, a system glitch, a spoofed address, anything. But the cold certainty in the agent's eyes told me this was no mistake, and then it hit me. Not like a lightning strike, but like ice water seeping into my bones, a slow, creeping horror. The wine. The crimson stain spreading across Eleanor's pristine white dress. Her perfectly feigned shock, her gentle insistence that I go upstairs and change immediately. "Alex, darling, find her something of mine." The 5, maybe 10 minutes I was gone, leaving my laptop, my government-issued, encrypted laptop, unattended on the coffee table in the living room. I could see it all with sickening clarity. Eleanor, or someone acting for her, slipping a small device into the USB port. A keylogger, a data cloner, something prepared long in advance. Run the program, attach the file, send the email, remove the device. By the time I came back downstairs, refreshed and oblivious in another woman's clothes, the betrayal was complete. The evidence was planted. The trap, so elegant in its simplicity, had been sprung. "We'll need to take your laptop as evidence, Major," Davies said, his tone leaving no room for argument. It wasn't a request. My career, my top-secret security clearance, my years of service, my very freedom, all of it was flashing before my eyes. In the military, an accusation like this isn't just a mark on your record. It's a death sentence for the life you've built. I was a traitor, a spy in the house of a United States senator. My gaze flickered to Alex. I was desperate for an ally, a lifeline, a single voice to say, "This is insane." But he just stood by the doorway, his face ashen. He looked from me to the agents, then to his parents, his expression a chaotic mix of confusion and disbelief. He didn't leap to my defense. He didn't challenge the accusation. He just stood there, silent. And his silence was a blade that twisted deeper than any formal charge. It was an admission of doubt, a crack in the foundation of everything I thought we had. "Of course," I said, my voice sounding distant, as if it belonged to someone else. I kept my chin up, my military training a shield against the panic clawing at my throat. You don't show weakness. You don't break. Not in front of the enemy. I walked to the living room, Agent Chen following a respectful but predatory 2 steps behind. I picked up the laptop. It felt impossibly heavy, a dead weight in my hands. It was my life's work, my connection to my squadron, my honor all condensed into a pound of aluminum and silicon. I handed it over to Davies. As my fingers let go, I felt a part of myself sever. The game was afoot. And I had just been stripped of my armor and my weapon. Eleanor finally broke the silence, her voice dripping with counterfeit sympathy. Oh, you poor thing. This must be a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. I'm sure it will all be cleared up soon. I met her eyes across the room. Behind the mask of concern, I saw it a flicker of triumph, as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. It was a declaration of war. She had fired the first shot, and it was a direct hit. But she was making the same mistake every civilian makes when they go up against a soldier. She thought the first hit wins the war. She didn't know that for people like me. It's just the beginning of the fight. Panic has no place in a cockpit at Mach 2, and it had no place in my living room, even as it was being dismantled by federal agents, the Sears school instructors who'd screamed in my face for hours in some god-forsaken corner of Washington state, had burned that lesson into my DNA. Control your breathing, control the situation. I drew a slow, deliberate breath, the air tasting of stale coffee and the cold scent of official paperwork. My heart rate, a frantic bird beating against my ribs, steadied. Going head-to-head with these stone-faced men was tactical suicide. A pilot doesn't engage a dozen enemy fighters alone. She changes the terms of the engagement. I needed evidence, not a confrontation. Gentlemen, I said, my voice as level and calm as a pre-flight checklist. It was a tone I'd used to brief generals, a tone that left no room for emotion. Before you take my laptop, would it be possible for me to back up a few personal, non-relevant files to a thumb drive? It will only take a moment. The request was designed to be innocuous, the plea of a sentimental wife wanting to save family photos. The lead agent, a man with tired eyes and a suit that looked a size too tight, gave me a long, assessing look. He saw a decorated pilot, yes, but right now in my home, surrounded by his men, he just saw a woman, cooperative and cornered. His dismissiveness was my opening. Under my supervision, ma'am. Be quick about it. That was all I needed. I walked to the desk, my movements measured. Every eye in the room was on me, but their scrutiny was superficial. They were looking for defiance, for an outburst. They weren't looking for a countermeasure. I pulled a small metallic USB drive from a ceramic cup on the desk. It was attached to my keychain, a cheap metal F-16 a kid from the Make-A-Wish Foundation had given me years ago. It felt cool and solid in my palm, an anchor in the storm. Under the agent's watchful gaze, I slid it into the port. The screen glowed to life, displaying our family photos as the wallpaper. Alex and I at a 4th of July BBQ on base, smiling, the picture of a perfect military couple. A bitter irony burned in my throat. I opened a file browser, my clicks methodical and slow. I ostentatiously dragged a folder labeled Vacation Hawaii and another one named Family Portraits toward the USB icon. But as my hand moved the mouse, my fingers danced across the keyboard in a sequence of commands drilled into muscle memory. A script I'd written years ago, a contingency plan for a scenario I never thought I'd face, executed silently in the background. It was a two-pronged attack. First, it initiated a deep copy of the system's most recent activity logs, every peripheral connection, every network handshake, every remote access attempt, and buried it within a hidden partition on the USB drive. I knew Eleanor, or whoever she was working for, must have used a physical device to plant that data. A ghost keylogger, a Trojan-loaded drive. It would have left a trace, a digital fingerprint. I was counting on their arrogance, on them believing I'd never look. Second, the script sent a silent, encrypted activation signal. The little F-16 keychain wasn't just a memento. It was a housing for a micro GPS tracker, currently dormant. The signal brought it to life, ready to ping its location to a secure server every 10 minutes. My laptop was now a Trojan horse. The progress bar for the photo transfer completed. All done, I said, pulling the drive out and pocketing it. Thank you for your courtesy. The lead agent grunted, bagging my laptop as if it were a biohazard. They moved out with the efficiency of a practice team, leaving silence and disarray in their wake. The front door clicked shut. The sound echoed in the sudden emptiness of the house. I stood frozen for a moment, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me. Then Alex, who had been standing by the window like a statue, turned to me. His face was pale, his eyes pleading. Maya, this has to be a misunderstanding. Just tell them what they want to know. Tell them everything. His words hit me harder than any physical blow. It wasn't an offer of support. It was an appeal for my surrender. Through the shock, the betrayal crystallized into a shard of ice in my chest. He didn't say, we'll fight this. He didn't say, I believe you. He said, tell them. He believed there was something to tell. He believed I was guilty. That was the second knife of the day, and this one was twisted by the hand I trusted most. The floor felt like it had fallen away, leaving me in a cold, silent free fall. In that moment, I knew I was utterly alone. My hand closed around the keychain in my pocket, its metallic edges digging into my skin. This was my new cockpit, and the fight for my life had just begun. The Vance mansion had become a gilded cage, and I was its only prisoner. Confined to my room under the guise of letting things cool down, I was effectively under house arrest. Downstairs, the storm of their family drama raged on, a muffled chorus of the senator's booming condemnations and Elinor's sharp, defensive retorts. It was a familiar sound, the soundtrack of this house, but tonight it had a serrated edge. My father was caught in the middle, his voice a low, placating rumble, trying to douse a fire that had already reached the rafters. I tuned them out. Their war was one of words and wounded pride. Mine was about to become something else entirely. Ignoring the opulent prison around me, I pulled out my secure-sat phone, its utilitarian design a stark contrast to the room's antique furniture. The screen flared to life, a lifeline to a world that made sense, a world of protocols and clear objectives. The GPS tracker I'd planted on the laptop bag wasn't moving. It was a solid, unwavering green dot, pinging from a fixed position somewhere on the estate grounds. My heart hammered against my ribs. A moving target is a person. A stationary target is a trap, or a drop point. My fingers flew across the encrypted messaging app. I attached the system log file I'd managed to pull from the laptop before it was confiscated. The recipient Major Sarah Ice Jenkins, my wingman in the sky, my anchor in the digital ether. Ice was the best damn cyber warfare specialist in the Marine Corps. We'd shared cramped bunks on carriers, stale coffee and pre-dawn briefings, and the silent understanding that comes from trusting someone with your six. My message was short, the way it always was when things were critical. Ice, priority 1. Analyze this file for me. The reply came back in less than 10 seconds. No questions, no hesitation. Just 2 words that spoke volumes about the trust we shared. Roger, Viper. That was all I needed. With Ice digging into the ones and zeros, I had to handle the physical end. I slipped out of my room, my stockinged feet silent on the thick Persian runner. The argument downstairs conveniently covered any sound I might make. I moved like a wraith through the house I was supposed to call home, my senses on high alert, every shadow a potential threat. The muscle in my shoulder, where the shrapnel had torn through, gave a dull throb, a constant reminder of a different kind of war, a simpler kind. The GPS dot led me out a side door, across a manicured lawn slick with evening dew, towards the far end of the garden. The greenhouse loomed ahead, a skeletal cathedral of glass and steel under the pale moonlight. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming night jasmine, a cloying sweetness that felt sinister. Inside, it was a jungle of exotic plants, their leaves casting strange, claw-like shadows. I navigated the narrow aisle, the green dot on my phone, leading me to a row of terracotta pots. It was pulsing right on top of one filled with a monstrous-looking orchid. I plunged my hand into the cool, damp soil, my fingers brushing against something hard and artificial. I pulled it out. It was a small, self-contained unit, a battery-powered Wi-Fi transceiver, no bigger than a deck of cards, with a small USB drive plugged into its side. The weapon. Elegant, silent, and designed to make me the fall guy. "You really should have learned your place, Captain." The voice sliced through the humid air, sharp and cold as shattered glass. I spun around, my body dropping into a defensive crouch. Alina stood at the entrance of the greenhouse, a silhouette against the moonlit lawn. The gracious hostess, the perfect politician's wife, was gone. In her place stood something coiled and venomous. "Your place was to be the broken little soldier my husband pitied," she continued, stepping into the dim light. Her face was a mask of cold fury, a sad story to burnish his public image. A daughter to show he has a heart. Not this, not someone who pokes her nose into things that don't concern her. My phone vibrated in my hand, a sudden, urgent buzz. I glanced down. It was a call from Ice. Without breaking eye contact with Eleanor, I answered and put it on speaker. "Viper, I got it." Ice's voice was crisp, cutting through the tension. "It's beautiful. The system log shows an unauthorized USB device connected at precisely 1942 hours, the exact moment you were upstairs being reamed out by the senator. The device uploaded a Trojan, spoofed an email from your account to the journalist, then initiated a self-erasing protocol to wipe its own signature." Alina's smile was a thin, cruel line. "Your word against mine, dear." "Hold on, I'm not done." Ice's voice was flinty. "The attacker was an amateur. Sloppy. They tried to scrub the hardware signature, but they couldn't erase the MAC address from the router's internal logs, and that MAC address is registered to a device owned by a shell corporation called Argent Solutions." I watched as a flicker of unease crossed Eleanor's face. She didn't know Ice. Ice never missed a detail. "And guess what, Viper?" Ice continued, her tone laced with triumph. "Argent Solutions has received exactly 3 payments over the last 6 months, all from a political action committee, the very same PESI managed by your stepmother's consulting firm." The air in the greenhouse turned electric. The final piece of the puzzle snapped into place. But Ice delivered the killing blow. "Oh, and the best part, the files that were sent, the leaked documents. I found fragments of them in the laptop's temporary cache. They were uploaded *to the laptop from the USB drive just 30 seconds before the email was sent. There's a digital timestamp. It proves you didn't create them. It proves you didn't possess them. It proves they were planted. I have everything, Viper. Everything." Silence descended, thick and heavy. All that was left was the sound of our breathing and the faint hum of Ice's open line. The mask didn't just crumble from Alina's face, it evaporated. What was left was pure, distilled hatred. Her eyes, fixed on me, burned with a terrifying light. "You," she hissed, the word a venomous dart. "You military brat. You think you've won?" She took a step forward, her hand reaching for a nearby steel gardening trowel. The moonlight caught the polished metal, and in that instant, I knew this was no longer about politics or secrets. This had become a matter of survival. The walk back to the senator's office felt like the final approach to a hostile target. Every nerve was lit, every instinct sharpened by years in the cockpit. The air inside the mahogany-paneled room was thick enough to choke on. Senator Thompson stood by the window, his back to us, a silhouette of power against the late afternoon sun. Eleanor was perched on the edge of a leather armchair, her posture rigid, a predator waiting to strike. And Alex. He stood in the middle of the room, caught in the crossfire, his face a mask of conflict. I didn't say a word. I walked to the center of the vast antique desk, my boots making no sound on the plush Persian rug. My shoulder throbbed, a dull, persistent reminder of the price of their lies. I placed my phone on the polished wood with a quiet, definitive click. The 3 of them watched the small black rectangle as if it were a live grenade. I tapped the screen, and Sarah's voice, clear and amplified by the speaker, filled the suffocating silence. She was all business, a surgeon dissecting a tumor. She laid it all out in encrypted messages from a shell corporation to a private investigator known for his dirty work. Financial records showing a transfer from one of Eleanor's offshore accounts just 2 days before my brake lines were cut. Geolocation data from a burner phone, purchased with cash, that pinged near my apartment the night of the incident and then again near the airfield. It was a digital ghost, and Sarah had caught it. As Sarah spoke, the color drained from Eleanor's face, leaving behind a waxy, pale canvas. The carefully constructed facade of the concerned matriarch crumbled into dust. "Lies!" she shrieked, bolting to her feet. The sound was ragged, torn from her throat. "This is a setup! She's a manipulative, gold-digging tramp, trying to ruin our family!" The senator turned from the window, his face a thundercloud of practiced political indignation. He wasn't looking for truth, he was calculating damage, triaging a career that was bleeding out on his expensive rug. "This is slander! An attack on my family and my office!" "I will have you prosecuted for this, Captain," he boomed, pointing a trembling finger at me. It was all a performance, but the fear behind it was real. The storm of their accusations raged around me, but I didn't flinch. I let them exhaust their fury. When the shouting subsided, the silence that followed was heavier than before. All three of them were looking at me. But my eyes were only on Alex. I kept my voice low, steady, the same tone I used in the comms just before a mission went hot. "Alex, they're threatening my life. They're trying to destroy your career to cover it up. The facts are on this table. The truth is right here." I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Who do you believe? Time seemed to stretch. Alex's gaze flickered from his father's apoplectic face to Eleanor's panicked snarl. He saw them not as his parents, but as they were a corrupt politician and a desperate accomplice. Then his eyes met mine. For a long second, I saw the doubt, the ingrained loyalty warring with the cold, hard logic laid out by Sarah's voice. Then something inside him broke. The conflict vanished, replaced by a devastating, painful clarity. "I believe her," he said. The words were quiet, but they resonated like a gunshot in that room. He took a deliberate step, then another, crossing the space that separated us. It was more than a few feet of carpet. It was a canyon between his past and his future. He came to a stop beside me, his shoulder almost touching mine, presenting a united front. In that instant, the battle lines were redrawn. It was us against them. The senator looked like he'd been struck. Eleanor let out a strangled gasp, but before either could unleash a new tirade, the office door opened. A young NCIS agent, the one who'd offered me a bottle of water earlier with a sympathetic look in his eyes, stood in the doorway. He'd clearly heard the shouting. His gaze swept the room, taking in the scene: Eleanor's disheveled fury, the senator's shock, and Alex standing firmly by my side. His eyes landed on the phone, still broadcasting Sarah's voice from the desk. I saw the understanding dawn on his face. This wasn't a domestic dispute or a simple inquiry anymore. He was looking at felony evidence tampering, conspiracy, and attempted murder involving a U.S. senator and an active-duty naval aviator. The case had just gone nuclear. He stepped fully into the room, his hand moving slowly, instinctively, toward the radio on his shoulder. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now devoid of sympathy and full of professional steel. "I think we need to secure this room." The silence that followed the storm was deafening. After months of running, of hushed conversations in darkened rooms, and the constant, metallic taste of fear, the quiet that settled over our Virginia safe house felt unnatural, like the dead air before a pressure wave hits. For 3 straight days, the only sound was the low drone of a 24-hour news channel, its anchors narrating the spectacular implosion of the Vance political machine with the kind of grave, breathless excitement usually reserved for natural disasters. It wasn't a bang. It was a slow, grinding collapse. I watched Eleanor's face, a mask of cold fury, flash across the screen. Her lawyer, a man who looked like he was carved from marble and regret, read a terse statement on the courthouse steps just after sunrise on the second day. Conspiracy. Tampering with federal evidence. Violating the Espionage Act. The words were heavy, final. To avoid a trial that would have exposed decades of rot, she took a plea deal. A quiet disgrace instead of a public execution. It was a tactical retreat, not a surrender, and I knew it. Then came the senator. He didn't hold a press conference. He released a statement around 10 in the morning, a single sheet of paper that ended a 40-year career. He would not be seeking re-election. Citing a need to focus on his family during this difficult time, he faded from the stage, implicated but not indicted, insulated by layers of power and plausible deniability. He was a ghost, and his haunting of the capital was over. The real cost, the shrapnel from that explosion, landed in our kitchen. Alex took the call from his father a little past midnight on the third day. He stood by the window, his back to me, the screen of the burner phone illuminating his profile. I couldn't hear the senator's words, but I could see them land. I saw the way Alex's shoulders, which I'd seen carry a wounded Marine half a click under fire, tightened and then slumped. He didn't speak a word, just listened as his entire life was rewritten by the man who had authored it. When the call ended, he stood motionless for a full minute. "He's disowned me," he said to the glass, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Said I sided with the enemy. Said I was no longer his son. He turned to face me, and the look in his eyes wasn't anger or sadness. It was a terrifying, hollowed-out emptiness. I crossed the room and took the phone from his hand, my fingers wrapping around his. They were ice cold. "We're the enemy, Alex," I asked softly, "for telling the truth." A strange light flickered in his eyes, something like the dawn breaking after a long, brutal night. A slow, bitter smile touched his lips. "Yeah," he whispered, the sound raw. "Yeah, I guess we are. But I'm free, Casey. God help me, for the first time in my life, I'm free." He pulled me into an embrace so tight, it felt like he was trying to fuse our bones together, trying to hold on to the one solid thing in his collapsed world. My own closure came in a crisp manila envelope delivered by a stoic government courier. An official letter of exoneration, a full reinstatement of my security clearance. Tucked inside was a commendation for professionalism and integrity in a situation of extreme duress. I laid the polished metal on the counter. It felt cold and foreign, a trophy from a war fought with whispers and encrypted files instead of bullets. It was a symbol that I had won, but I felt no victory. All I felt was the phantom weight of the surveillance, the chilling memory of being hunted by my own. That evening, as a bruised purple twilight settled over the Virginia hills, we made our decision. We couldn't stay. This place, this state, was saturated with ghosts. Every quiet country road, every stately brick building, felt like part of the empire that had tried to crush us. It was poisoned ground. "Where do we go?" Alex asked, tracing patterns on a dusty map of the US we'd found in a drawer. "West," I said without hesitation. "Until we run out of road. Until the air feels clean." We packed light. 2 duffel bags with the few clothes we had, the files we'd copied, my service pistol, and the commendation medal, which I'd wrapped in a sock and shoved at the bottom of my bag. We left everything else. We wiped the place clean, a habit ingrained from years of fieldwork. Leave no trace. By morning, we were in my old pickup truck, heading west on I-64, the sun rising in our rearview mirror. Alex finally fell asleep as we crossed into West Virginia, his head leaning against the passenger window. For the first time in months, his face was relaxed, free from the tension that had become his permanent mask. A wave of profound relief washed over me. The war was over. The empire was in ashes. We had survived. We had a future unwritten and entirely our own. My phone, a new burner we'd bought for cash, vibrated on the console. I glanced at the screen. A blocked number. A single text message. It read, "The snake is not dead. It only shed its skin. He knows you're going west. Watch your 6. 3 years." In the rearview mirror of a life lived at the edge of the sound barrier, 3 years can feel like a lifetime and a single breath, all at once. 3 years since we'd left the humid, conspiratorial air of Washington, D.C., choking in our wake. Here, in San Diego, the salt-laced wind off the Pacific felt like it had scoured that entire chapter from my soul. We lived in a small house with a yard that was mostly sand, close enough to murmur that the roar of F/A-18s taking off was our daily anthem. To me, it was the sound of freedom. I'd traded my Viper cockpit for a classroom mostly. As an instructor at Top Gun, I was now the one pushing the new generation of hotshots to their absolute limits, and then a little further. I saw my own fire in their eyes, that hunger, that unbreakable confidence. But I taught them more than just advanced ACM and carrier landings. I taught them to look past the yachty, to read the tells in an adversary's flight path, to trust their gut when the instruments screamed otherwise. I taught them about the battles that happen on the ground, in hushed briefing rooms and polished offices, where the most dangerous enemy might be wearing the same uniform. It was a lesson I'd paid for in scars, both visible and not, and I was determined they would get it cheaper. Alex had found his own sky. His new workshop, a converted garage a few miles from the coast, smelled of ozone, carbon fiber, and a kind of focused intensity that I hadn't seen in him since his flying days. He'd started a company, a small, lean operation that designed and fabricated bespoke assistive devices for wounded veterans. He didn't just build prosthetics, he built extensions of the men and women who wore them. I'd watch him for hours, his hands, once deft enough to manage a dozen controls in a high G-turn, now carefully molding a socket or calibrating a micro actuator for a soldier who'd lost a leg in Kandahar. He was giving them back their mobility, their independence. In rebuilding them, he was rebuilding himself. He'd finally escaped his father's shadow, not by fighting it, but by turning his back on it and walking into the light. Our real family was forged here, under the relentless California sun. It was a patchwork of pilots, ground crew, a few Navy SEAL Alex had gotten to know through his work, and their families. It was a tribe bound by shared sacrifice and an unspoken understanding of the cost of service. Our gatherings weren't the cold, strategic affairs of the Caldwell dynasty, measured in political capital and advantageous connections. They were loud, chaotic squadron barbecues on the beach, fueled by cheap beer and questionable grilling techniques. This afternoon was a perfect example. The sun was beginning its slow descent towards the ocean, painting the sky in strokes of orange and violet. The smoke from the grill carried the scent of sizzling burgers. Kids were shrieking with laughter as they fled the incoming tide. Alex was standing near the fire pit, deep in conversation with Sarah Jenkins, Colseen Ice, one of the sharpest pilots I'd ever had the pleasure of flying against. She was laughing, her head thrown back, at something he'd said. He was smiling, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. The tension that used to live permanently in his shoulders was gone. A few years ago, a scene like that might have sparked a flicker of something ugly in me. Insecurity, jealousy. But now, all I felt was a profound, bone-deep peace. I realized then that some battles aren't won with missiles and cannons. They're won with choices. My greatest victory wasn't a confirmed kill or a flawlessly executed mission. It was fought in a sterile, climate-controlled office in Virginia, with my career, my freedom, and my future on the line. The victory wasn't just exposing a traitor, it was watching the man I loved break. The chains his father had spent a lifetime forging. It was him choosing truth, choosing us, over a legacy of lies and ambition. We hadn't just survived Senator Caldwell's trap. We'd taken the shattered pieces of the life he'd planned for us and used them as the foundation for this one. A life of our own making. Alex caught my eye from across the beach, and his smile widened. He gave Ice a friendly pat on the shoulder and started walking towards me, his gait still carrying the faint, almost imperceptible echo of the injuries that had grounded him. It was a reminder of the price we'd paid. He stopped in front of me, shielding my eyes from the setting sun. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice a low rumble against the crash of the waves. "You looked a million miles away." "Just the opposite," I said, reaching up to touch his face. "I'm right here. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He leaned in to kiss me, slow and sure. In that moment, the world was perfect. The air was warm, the company was good, and the past was finally where it belonged. Just then, Tank Kowalski, our squadron's resident giant, jogged over, kicking up sand. "Hey, Viper." "Alex. Sorry to interrupt." He was holding a small, crisp white envelope. It looked ridiculously out of place. "This just came. Courier dropped it at the main gate. Said it was urgent for Major Caldwell." My stomach tightened. No one used Alex's old rank anymore, not here. Alex took the envelope, a frown creasing his brow. He tore it open. It wasn't a letter. Inside was a single, heavy metal object that he tipped into his palm. It was a custom-made tie clip, a polished silver eagle with a single, tiny ruby for an eye. There was no note. None was needed. It was the gift his father had given him upon his graduation from the academy. The one Alex had supposedly lost in the chaos after the incident. The one I saw on Senator Caldwell's desk in Virginia, the day Alex told him he was done. Seeing it now, here in his hand, felt like a ghost had just walked over my grave. The sun was gone, the air suddenly felt cold, and I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that our new dawn was already over.